This happened one night when I was driving my friends back from an out-of-town concert. My friends were Sarah, Kai, and Mason. We live in a pretty rural area, so when we want to see any decent bands or go to any real venues, we have to make these long drives. That's why we always carpool together, to split gas money. We were driving back on this 2-lane road with just scattered farms and old houses. The road cut through a lot of wooded areas before it eventually connects back to the main highway. This story takes place about halfway through our drive home. Sarah started complaining that she was getting carsick from all the winding turns. I told her we could pull over at the next gas station, but honestly I was starting to feel pretty tired myself. That mixed with the fact that Sarah was now leaning forward looking like she might throw up, I figured we should definitely make a stop when I saw the old gas station up ahead. When I pulled over, Sarah got out first and headed straight for the back room around the side of the building. I went to grab some coffee and maybe a snack for the road. The place was one of those old-style gas stations that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. Kai and Mason stayed in the car with the music still playing while I pretty much just wandered around the aisles trying to wake myself up. As time passed, my two friends didn't seem to notice that Sarah had been gone for almost 10 minutes now, so I decided to check on her. I called her name from outside the bathroom door, but she didn't answer back. The door was locked, so I figured maybe she was just really sick in there. I didn't want to be that guy banging on the bathroom door, but I was starting to get worried since she wasn't responding at all. I went back to get Kai since he's known Sarah the longest and might have a better idea of what to do. Mason was half asleep in the passenger seat to this point, so we left him in the car. Kai and I walked back around to the side of the building where the restrooms were. Kai was knocking on the door and calling Sarah's name, but still getting no response. I was starting to think maybe she'd passed out or something. Over our voices calling for her, I heard what sounded like a car door slamming from the back side of the gas station. I motioned up to Kai to be quiet so that we could listen better, and that's when we heard an engine starting up. Kai looked at me and asked me what was that. I told him I wasn't sure, then Kai called out Sarah's name again, this time louder. I joined in, figuring maybe she'd stepped outside for some fresh air and couldn't hear us. But when we walked around the back of the building, there was nobody there. That's when we found the back door to the gas station. It was one of those employee-only doors that led to a storage area or something. The door was slightly open, which seemed weird since it was almost midnight and the place looked like it was barely staffed. I pushed the door open a little bit wider and called Sarah's name into the darkness. I could hear movement inside, like boxes being moved around or something heavy being dragged across the floor. I thought maybe it was just the gas station attendant doing some inventory or whatever, but something about the whole situation felt off. However, when I shined my phone's light into the room, I could see Sarah's purse on the floor near the stacked boxes. I went in to grab her purse, thinking she must have dropped it, and that's when I heard Sarah's voice coming from deeper in the storage room. She was mumbling in a panicked voice. Kai heard it too and immediately started yelling her name while pushing past me into the room. I shined my phone light towards the sound and I could see a man trying to drag Sarah towards the open side door. The guy looked up when he saw our lights and immediately let go of Sarah and bolted out the side door. Sarah collapsed onto the floor looking dazed and confused. Kai and I both ran up to her. She was conscious but seemed really out of it. She kept saying that she felt dizzy and couldn't remember how she got into that room. The side door was swinging open when the guy had run out and we could hear the car engine revving up and tyres screeching as somebody sped away. I ran to the front of the gas station to see if I could get a look at the vehicle, but by the time I got there all I could see were taillights bouncing and disappearing down the road. The gas station attendant was nowhere to be found and obviously not much use. Kai helped Sarah back to the car where Mason was just starting to wake up from all the commotion. Sarah was still pretty shaky and kept saying she felt sick. We decided we needed to get her to the hospital right away to make sure she was okay and report what happened. The drive there was tense. Sarah was in and out of consciousness in the back seat and Kai was trying to keep her awake while I drove. We brought her into the emergency room and they ran some tests that confirmed she had been drugged with something that would have made her more easy to control. The police took our statements and searched the gas station, but the guy was long gone by then. Sarah recovered fully after a few hours, but she never got her memory back from the time she went to the bathroom until the time we found her in that storage room. The whole thing still gives me the chills thinking about what could have happened if we hadn't got there in time. The thing that's most creepy is that we still need to drive past that gas station every time we want to get out of town to anywhere decent, so that memory's going to stick with us forever. This happened in May 2015. I'd been working as a forest warden for about 3 years at that point, and I'd seen pretty much everything you could see out there. But over the course of 2 weeks, we started getting reports from different people about strange things happening in the northeast section of the forest. The first report came in from a couple who'd been camping near Miller's Creek. They said they heard what sounded like somebody walking around their campsite early evening, but when they looked outside their tent with their flashlights, they couldn't see anybody. A few days later, we got another call from a guy who had been hiking alone. He said around sunset he heard branches snapping behind him like something was following him through the trees. He never saw anything, but he said it gave him an awful feeling. One evening, I decided to head out there myself and see what I could find. I brought one of the old night vision scopes that we had and planned to wander the area for a few hours. I parked at the main trailhead and hiked 2 miles to a clearing where most of the reports had been coming from. For the first 2 hours, everything seemed completely normal. I could hear the usual forest sounds, nothing out of the ordinary. I was starting to think this whole thing was probably nothing, when I heard something that made me really stop and listen. It was a sound I couldn't quite place. Not footsteps, not exactly, but like something moving through the underbrush. It would go for maybe 10 or 15 seconds, then stop completely for a minute or two, and then start again. Whatever it was, it seemed to be moving in a rough circle around the area that I was in. I stayed as quiet as possible and kept listening for a few moments, but then the sound faded. Whatever it was, it seemed to have passed. I decided to move to a spot where I had a better view of the main clearing, about 100 yards away. There was a large tree I could sit against that would keep me hidden but still give me a good sightline. I got my night vision scope ready and waited. I first saw movement at the far edge of the clearing, about 120 yards away. I raised the scope to my eyes and adjusted the focus. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was definitely something out there, and it looked like it might be a person, but the way it was moving was completely wrong. I couldn't really make out what I was seeing because of the distance, the terrain and the brush, but whatever it was, it seemed to be crawling on all fours. But not like somebody who had fallen or was injured. It was moving like that was its natural way of getting around. The proportions looked human, but honestly I couldn't tell either way. I tried to get a better look by adjusting my position slightly. I moved about 10 feet to the left to get a different angle, and through the scope I could see it more clearly now. The white glow definitely had a general shape of a person, but there was something very off about the whole thing. The way the arms and the legs moved, the way the head was positioned, none of it looked right. Then something happened that gave me the most unsettling feeling I've ever had. The thing stopped moving completely and appeared to turn its head directly towards where I was sitting, revealing odd-looking features. I froze for a second in fear. I was at least 100 yards away and hidden by trees, but I got the distinct feeling that it knew exactly where I was. It stayed perfectly still, just facing my direction. I kept my scope on it, barely breathing, hoping it would just move on, but then it started moving again. This time it was coming slowly towards my side of the clearing. Not directly at me, but definitely in my general direction. really couldn't understand what I was seeing. I decided to get out of there immediately. I packed up as quietly as I could and made my way back towards the trail. I tried not to rush or panic, but I felt so unsettled by the whole encounter. When I got back to the station, I filed a report saying that there appeared to be somebody in the forest who might be trespassing or camping illegally. I recommended increased patrols in that area and suggested that we put some trail cameras up to monitor the situation. But honestly, I have no idea what I actually saw out there that night. It must have been a person, but deep down I know that what I saw didn't look like any person I've ever encountered. And the way that they seemed to know I was watching still gives me the chills when I think about it. I've never been back to that section of the forest, and I don't think I ever will. This happened to me about 3 years ago. I just signed a lease to move into a new apartment, and when I say new, I mean brand new. I was one of the only tenants. The first couple of weeks went by smoothly with no problems at all. The main reason I chose this place was because I'd started taking online classes, so having a quiet place to study was really important. The apartment complex was kind of isolated and gave me the perfect environment to focus. One afternoon, while I was working on an assignment, I got a knock at the door. When I went over and opened it, it was my property manager. He was smiling and asking me how everything was going. I said everything was fine, still confused about why he was there. He tried to chat for a few minutes before saying he was just doing a routine check and then left. I went back to my work, but that was definitely strange. I didn't mind him being nice, but he could have just called from the office instead of showing up unannounced. Later that evening, I explored the complex. The buildings were spread out quite a bit, so I never really got to see the whole place. I walked around for about 20 minutes, then headed back. As I came around the corner towards my building, I noticed a maintenance van parked near the entrance. It wasn't right in front of my building, but there weren't many other units in this section. When I got closer and walked past it, I recognised it was the same van the property manager had driven when he first showed me the apartment. Nobody was inside. I went upstairs and into my apartment. I looked out through my blinds trying to see if he was there working on something, but I couldn't spot him anywhere. I wasn't really scared, just annoyed by the whole thing. I'd expected to be just left alone. I'd literally just walked around the complex, so I couldn't figure out where else he could be besides somewhere in my building. After a few minutes I stopped checking because I wasn't seeing anything. Instead I went back to finishing my studying. Later that evening there was another knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw it was the property manager again. I opened the door, irritated now. He asked me how my day was going. Politely but firmly I said I was fine, but I would appreciate a heads up before he comes by. He said sorry and explained that he just wanted to make sure I was settling in okay. I nodded and said that I needed to get back to my studying, and then closed the door. Something about the way he acted and spoke just felt off. Obviously the guy had no sense of boundaries, but I don't know, something about him just made me feel uncomfortable. I went to bed that night trying to think of how to tell him to stop bothering me. He was the property manager and this was his site, but tenants still have a right to privacy. I fell asleep still wondering what the best approach would be, but I got woken up later. It was 11:40 PM when knocking on my door jolted me awake. I turned on my lamp and went to the living room, thinking that if it was the property manager again, I was really going to lose it. I looked through the peephole and of course it was him. I yanked the door open and told him to leave, not hiding my frustration. That's when I noticed he was carrying a toolbox. He said there was an urgent issue with the water heater that served my unit and a few others. But I hadn't noticed any water problems, and it seemed really suspicious that this was happening right at the middle of the night. I told him I'd call the maintenance line in the morning and started to close the door, when he suddenly stepped forward and pushed past me into my apartment, acting like he didn't realise I was trying to shut the door. I just stood there completely shocked and not sure what to do. He looked at me, now completely inside my home, and smiled, saying it won't take long. He set down his toolbox and told me to come with him so he could show me where the problem was. He walked towards the back of my apartment where the water heater closet was, and reluctantly I followed a few steps before I had an idea. I made an excuse to grab my phone, saying I wanted to document the problem for my insurance. Luckily, he stayed put. I grabbed my phone and the keys and then headed to the front door, but before I left I quickly looked into the toolbox he'd brought, just to confirm my suspicions. Inside there were barely any tools, just some random items that didn't make any sense for plumbing work. I couldn't tell what most of them were and I didn't want to stick around to find out. I heard him calling my name from the back of the apartment as I rushed out and ran down to the car. I called the police from the parking lot. What happened still makes me angry to this day. The property manager was gone when the police arrived. The toolbox he brought was nowhere to be found either. All I could do was break my lease without penalty after filing a complaint with the management company. But it still bothers me knowing that he's probably still out there.